Stand up for righteousness. Stand up for justice. Stand up for truth.
I truly believe that thoughts are the greatest vehicle to change.
We do not care whether the cat is black or white, as long as it can catch mice.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Victory in spite of all terror. Victory however long and hard the road may be.
To those waiting with bated breath for that favorite media catchphrase, the U-turn, I have only one thing to say. U-turn if you want to. The ladies not for turning.
The important thing in life is not the triumph, but the fight. The essential thing is not to have won, but to have fought well. The Olympic Creed is a quote from French educator Pierre de Coubertin, the founder of the modern Olympic Games. As we come together in anticipation of its 32nd edition, I thought this was an appropriate quote for our guest today, someone who embodies the Olympic values of excellence, friendship and respect, the flag bearer and team captain of the Australian contingent at Rio de Janeiro in 2016. Our guest today is two-time Olympic gold medalist Anna Meares OAM, the first Australian athlete to ever win 4 individual medals at 4 consecutive Olympic Games. In her 22 years as an elite track cyclist, she has broken multiple records and consistently won in multiple World Championships and Commonwealth Games, making her the most decorated and successful female track cyclist in history. Hello and welcome to another episode of No Limitations, a show where we speak to elite world-class performing men and women and unlock the secrets and influences that have shaped their destinies and that you could apply to your own life. For our first-time listeners and followers from all over the world, please don't forget to subscribe on your preferred podcast platform. And for our listeners in England, Brazil and Japan, a big hello. I am your host, Greg Robinson, Managing Partner of Blendon Partners, the #1 research-led executive search and board advisory firm. In this conversation, we are treated to Anna's tales of triumph, perseverance, and overcoming adversity. A born competitor, she shares with us the moment that ignited her quest for success, the tremendous dedication many can only imagine in her journey to the Everest of her sport, and her astounding recovery from the accident which threatened to derail her life way beyond the bank tracks of the velodrome. So sit back and enjoy dedication beyond comprehension. Anna, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Greg.
So you competed in 4 consecutive Olympic Games. You're a 2-time Olympic champion, 11-time world champion, but you had an accident in 2008 which could have changed everything. Can you talk us through the accident and what was going on through your mind during that period and thereafter?
Yeah, I was in Los Angeles in January of 2008 at a World Cup event, which was a qualifying race for Beijing, and I had made the Keirin final. And unfortunately, I clipped the wheel of an opponent within the final lap of that race and found myself falling to the velodrome floor. It's something that happens often, almost at every competition, given that we ride bikes at a fixed wheel with no brakes, a clipping of the wheel at the speeds that we travel and how close in proximity we compete against each other in is quite a common affair. But yeah, the accident saw me with a long list of injuries, and to top that list off was a fractured C2 vertebra, which left me in a pretty damaged state, I guess you could say. And believing that my dream of going to a second Olympic Games had literally flown out the window. So despite that, I did say to my coach before he left the hospital to come home to Australia that I would still be right for Beijing. And by the time I got home a week later from the US Medical Center in Los Angeles, he had gone back to my team and completely rerouted the whole plan required for me to still attempt to make Beijing happen. So lots of ups and downs, obviously, with a physical injury. It's surprising how much of that can start to affect mental and emotional states as well.
Yeah.
And the process of the road to recovery.
So look, just for layman's terms, from what I understand, the fracture was 2 millimeters short of a clean break, which is broken neck.
Mm-hmm.
And the worst possible outcome could have been quadriplegia, and even possible death if it had been as bad as the worst we could think of.
Quadriplegia would have been the best case scenario had that 2 millimeters been longer on that break. Obviously, the C2 level is where the lung attachments go through, so breathing would have required a respirator for the rest of my life. And obviously, worst case scenario would have been a loss of life. So yeah, it was a pretty profound piece of information to learn as a young athlete, and was really struck by a lot of fear and a lot of doubt. Even though that was the initial response, it was my coach who brought me around to start thinking in the what is context, and just dealing with the information that I had at hand and how I looked at that information. And simply, he got me looking at it in a positive way, and that 2 millimeters really did save my life. And every day going forward, I would be getting stronger and healthier, and looking forward to that potential of making the Olympic Games team.
Yeah, but Anna, is it true the what-if scenario sums up, 10 days later, you're back on a bike?
Yes, 10
Serious?
days later, I was on a bike.
Really?
Not in the context that you would be aware of.
Wow.
I mean, it was set up on a rig at home on my indoor trainer with a self-adjustable portable clothes rack in front of me to help with balance, because one thing I couldn't do, which I didn't realize you couldn't do until I broke my neck, was support the weight of my own head. So it was really important to get active again rather than allow the body to seize up. And to do that, I had to sit as upright as possible, because I quite simply could not lean on the handlebars of my bike.
Okay, so this is all mind over matter. This is willpower, but what's the motivation? Can you just talk us through this? This is a severe accident. What speed were you traveling? Just give us an idea.
65 k's an hour.
Yep.
When I fell and obviously hit the banking of the velodrome, which is steeped at about 43, 45 k's an hour.
Right.
It's not so much always just drive and motivation. Sometimes it's youth and naivety. Sometimes it's not comprehending the full severity, even though you have the information at hand. But for me, it was, I had been at the Olympics before in 2004 in Athens. I was only 20 years of age. I knew what that felt like. I'd won gold and bronze there, and I was desperate to be there again. And I knew that waiting another 4 years was going to be very, very difficult. And I just didn't want to wait.
What does it feel like? What does it feel like to win the gold then? If that's what's making you get up back on that bike in 10 days, what does it actually feel like to make you do it again?
It's hard to just sum it up in a brief detail, but it's almost having every possible emotion that you could describe hit you all at once. It's absolute elation. It's sheer shock and surprise. It's utter relief. Once all that kind of shock and emotion hits you too, it's taking a breath and looking up and realizing there's a few thousand people in the stands and a few million people at home. And yeah, it's a really surreal experience. But to win that gold medal, it really is an overwhelming sense of achievement. We're spoilt by our Australian athletes in the level of success that we have had and continue to have, that we forget how hard it is to be number one sometimes.
Is that what drove you to being the number one?
No, what drove me was I loved competition, hated losing, but loved competition. So yeah, we didn't get much of an opportunity to showcase ourselves at racing, because being in Australia, you've got to travel a long way to get that international competition. It costs a lot of money. You spend a lot of time away from home and family and friends. And when we did get a chance to race, it was white line fever.
Where did you grow up? Where did this all begin?
I grew up in a small coal mining town called Middlemount in central Queensland. And I was born in the regional hospital out at Blackwater, which was the serving hospital for that area.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately in 94, I watched the Commonwealth Games with my sister Kerry on TV, and witnessed Kathy Watt win gold for Australia, and that sparked our interest in track cycling, which took us to Mackay or Walkerston, where closest cycling track was, and we were there for 2 years every weekend on a 600k round trip.
So that's mum and dad driving every 300 k's each way?
Yep, each way. And then after 2 years, moving into Rockhampton, where there was better coaching and sporting facilities, and stayed there for about 7 years before I was invited to Adelaide at the AIS Cycling Australia High Performance Program. And I turned down the first offer at the age of 18, and then after I won my first senior individual medal in the Keirin the year after, at the age of 19, I accepted a second invitation.
When did you reckon you were pretty special? When did you think, I've got a talent for this?
I don't think it was ever a matter of thinking that I was special.
Okay.
I always knew I had a bit of fight in me, but I wasn't good when I started. I was, like most kids, we develop at different rates and different ages, and I was very skinny, very short, really had to battle early on. But it was, I know a turning point was for me, thinking maybe I could make something of it when I won the junior world titles in Trexlertown, America, and Pennsylvania in 2001.
But also, wasn't there someone in the family also pretty good on the bike at one stage?
Oh, yeah, not just one stage.
All the way through? Okay, so a bit of a competitive started at home with the sister?
Oh, well, I'm the youngest of four in my family, so competition was constant, whether it was food on the table or top bunk or shotgun in the car. We were all a very sporty family, from mum and dad through all the kids. And my closest sister, Kerry, and I did cycling together through to 2009. Kerry was a dual Commonwealth champion, a dual Commonwealth bronze medalist, a world medalist, so very, very successful, but unfortunately didn't make an Olympic berth because at the time it was just one position for a female sprinter, because we didn't have equal event opportunity at the Olympic Games as our male counterparts. So Commonwealth and world level was a different story, but the Olympic Games was pretty cutthroat.
And like just on that, as you say, compared to the rest of the world, where was Australia in the sense of advanced focused in cycling? Are we up to speed during those days? We're a long way behind? Because it's not a sport that we're all necessarily thrown into.
Australia has always been very competitive in the cycling, and across nearly all the disciplines, and particularly in the sprint disciplines, Australia's had a really strong history. Female sprinters internationally have only ever been included in the Olympics since 1988, and there have only actually been 7 Olympic sprint champions in the women's disciplines. And so, yeah, in terms of Australian sprinting, it's definitely got a rich history. Sadly, it's not one that many people know.
Okay. And so growing up, getting that exposure, who were the big influences to guide you down this path?
Well, my first coach, Ken Tucker, was obviously a big influencer outside of family, and he handed the reins over to Martin Barras when I was invited to the AIS as a 19-year-old. Martin Barras took me through to the Beijing Olympic Games through my accident and the recovery, and then he handed the reins over to Gary West, whom I worked with for almost a decade in a very successful partnership as athlete and coach and team. My manager, Francine Pinnock, was also a very big influencer. Loved the sport of cycling, but as a female in her era, didn't have an opportunity to compete. And so when our paths crossed at a barbecue through a mutual friend, she was more than happy as a very successful international businesswoman to become my manager. And Kerry and I were the only athletes she managed. We were her hobbies. And she was able to just offer a completely different insight to psychology and competition. Obviously, there's lots of influences and inspiration and people that you look up to in the team. And certainly Shane Kelly was a big one. And I love my sport. And I have also, now that I'm retired, got incredible mentors in people like Marjorie Jackson Nelson, Margaret Ralston, Steve Waugh, that I can just tap into and have a chat to every now and then, which is just fantastic.
Well, we started off on the big accident, but just throughout your career, can you sort of give us an understanding for those who maybe haven't cycled anywhere near your level? What is the injury rate like, and also how does one overcome it mentally, as you say?
Well, the injury rate's actually quite low, surprisingly. Well, I've only ever broken one bone in my body, and that was my neck. I've probably hit the deck a handful of times. I could count on one hand the amount of times I've hit the deck. If you're going to do injury, you're probably likely as a sprinter to do it in training, because you do spend much more time under load and under pressure, pushing the boundaries to try and improve. By the time competition comes along, that load has subsided in order for you to be able to spring out with a bit of energy.
So the Olympics isn't too far away. One of the big things about performing at the highest level is managing pressure and peaking at the right time.
Yes.
What advice do you give to those who may be listening to athletes out there listening to this before they get up on those blocks? How do you manage it?
Well, I don't know that I would offer advice. I just share my experiences. I really trusted my team. I wasn't an expert at writing programs and structuring how the taper phases went. I had to trust in their ability. I had to buy into the strategies that I was included in creating early on and back the process of making that happen over a long period of time and back myself. Sometimes that's a really tricky thing to do because doubt is obviously something that is constant. You just got this wonder if it's going to work, if you're going to be competitive, all that sort of stuff. But when it comes to pressure, it's just as we hire coaches to help us bring the best out of ourselves physically, it's really important to hire coaches to bring the best out of us mentally and acquire those mental skills to be able to understand how we respond to pressure and expectation and stress in order to be able to cope with those situations going forward. And learning to be open-minded and in that regard helps you be an all-rounded athlete. And even with the best support that I had in my time, I still struggle. It's just a matter sometimes also of just bluffing your way through.
You had a sports psychologist?
Yes, I worked with quite a few in my time and also worked with clinical psychologists as well because the perspectives on experiences are very different. And still to this day, I have great relationships with my sports psychs and I still have working relationships with my clinical psychs. It's very important going forward, especially with the times that we're living in now, facing COVID-19 and dealing with, transition away from the sporting career and all the little challenges that life can throw at you. It's very volatile at the best of times. It's nice to be able to have that removed ear to be able to go and talk to gain advice and perspective from when required.
In regards to the mental preparation, where would you put that in the weighting of being successful?
It has to be on par. There's no point being the best physical specimen if you don't know how to use the tools that you've got.
Yep.
And the tools that you've got can be really affected by the environment that you're required to perform in as an athlete. So if that's a risk that any athlete's prepared to take, then by all means, but it certainly wasn't one that I was prepared to do.
We just discussed about mental, competitiveness, but if you're looking at, you said a minute ago regarding COVID, regarding the challenges out there, if we looked on the increased focus on mental health amongst, prominent sports people at the moment, particularly in the media, Naomi is coming up at the moment, Naomi Osaka, and her withdrawal from the French Open. What do you think can be done or help be done for athletes like that in their preparation?
Well, I'm certainly not going to speak in any regards about Naomi or her circumstances or what I think she should do. I think it's just having a little bit of respect and perspective and understanding and even empathy for the position that they find themselves in as athletes and the pressure that it can impart. I know certainly in my time as an athlete, the more success that I had, the harder I found that. I certainly went from the early part of my career loving trying to win to the latter part of my career where I was quite fearful of what happened when I didn't, the repercussion, the media headlines, the opinions, and the judgment that comes from that. You certainly don't go into a competition to lose. But like I said earlier, I think sometimes we forget how hard it can be to be number one and understand the emotions of the roller coaster that can come with pressure. And, especially in the environment of today, COVID and the insecurity that a lot of people feel as a result of that and the instability that has certainly impacted. It's, the mental side of things is probably the biggest factor that we're all facing at the moment.
And your career wasn't short, was it, at the top?
No, I did 16 years at the elite high performance senior level.
Yeah.
And I was 22 years all up in the sport.
So that's remarkable, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a long time. And, I thought maybe I'd get one games rotation out of myself and you put my university on hold. And by the time I retired some 16, 20 years later, I certainly have very different interests and passions now. So it is a long time, but many people search their whole life looking for something that they're passionate about, and I found that young and early through sport, and in particular in cycling.
Were you overly talented?
I had talent, yeah. I think it's fair to say I was talented. I'm creative, visual, was good at school, cheeky, bit naughty sometimes as a young kid. And I think sometimes too, being the baby of the family, just where I fell in that roster, lended to a certain character as I grew up. And all of my siblings are coming around for a barbecue this weekend, and I'll be on survival mode like you wouldn't believe this weekend. Yeah, with all my older siblings turning up, but I love it, and we wouldn't have it any other way.
Can I ask you something about racing? How much is speed? How much is tactics?
Well, they both go hand in hand. It can certainly help to have the speed advantage, and sometimes the engine is just too good in some athletes. But there are times where the engine is just not helped in terms of not knowing what to do with it. It's also, in terms of my sport, it was all about having enough knowledge of your opponents to understand their strengths and weaknesses in order to be able to execute certain skills and strategies to give yourself the best chance to either negate their strengths or take advantage of their weaknesses. And it's not an easy environment. It's a one-on-one situation. It's very gladiatorial in that sense. And so if you can't handle the pressure and of that one-on-one, really under the spotlight and highlight, then you will crack. And anyone that I raced against that I knew, struggled, I certainly took advantage of that. And I know that in the latter part of my career, other athletes did that to me.
Well, you had a particular opponent for a number of years, didn't you?
Well, yes, I did. My sister Kerry, and then Victoria Pendleton. But the longest one I had was actually myself.
And is that really right? Is it really yourself at the end of the day?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I was very, very harsh, very good at judging, very analytical. And even today in my retirement, my partner tells me to chill out. That's the polite way of putting it. But I think sometimes it takes a special kind of creature to be successful in the pointy end of sport and competition. And it's not about being selfish. I think selfish is when you start to hinder someone else and make your own success happen. It takes a real dedication that many people just don't have the comprehension of.
Was there a particular favourite moment in all the Olympics that you've competed in?
Oh, it's really tough. There's lots of great moments that don't even involve sport, that are just being in the environment, seeing superstars, meeting royalty. In terms of what I felt at the time of things happening, London was certainly incredible. Athens was just a holy shit moment as a young 20-year-old. But carrying the flag was certainly a highlight in Rio at my final games. It was certainly something I will never forget, walking into the Maracana Stadium after Australia was announced and just being hit with a wall of noise. And we're really respected as a nation in sport, and certainly at the Olympic level as well, and very much loved across the world. So it was a really proud moment to be able to lead a team that I not only had been a part of, but had dreamt of and watched as a young kid growing up as well.
As a captain, can you talk us through what is the role as the captain?
My role was to inspire the team.
Okay.
And I was given 3 minutes to do that in a speech, which I have no trouble talking, but when you have to kind of condense it to a time frame like that, it took me weeks to work out what to say. And just, I guess, make yourself available, because I went from being the rookie of the team in Athens and no one knowing me to all of a sudden everyone in the team knowing me. And we had a large proportion of members of our team in Rio that were first-time members of the Olympic team. And so it was really important for me as a leader to bring myself to their level rather than them putting me above them, because we were all members of the same team. We were all there representing not just our country, but our families and ourselves and our communities. And, unity, I think, was a really important element for me, because it always had been in my career. I needed to know that my coach and my team were in my corner so that I could go out and compete against the best in the world. Because if it didn't happen, then it was those people I went back to.
How are you surviving financially during all this, during your career? How tough is it?
Yeah, it is tough
Yeah.
as an Olympic athlete. A lot of people think when you win an Olympic gold medal, you're instantly rich. Not the case. No, I worked 2 jobs until my second Olympic Games in Beijing.
Is that right?
I was a bank teller by day, and I did temporary work placements. So I was the relief staffer by the time I moved to Adelaide. So I just got called around to all the different branches when someone got called in sick. My training allowed me to be called in 2 days a week. And then my sister Kerry got me a job in the canteen of the hockey and soccer stadiums in Adelaide, which we'd been used to that style of work because our parents had a barbecue chicken shop for 7 years to help fund our sporting ventures.
Right.
And so if I worked in the day or trained, then I would go and work in the canteens with Kerry at night to be able to make a bit more money. And if I didn't get shifts, I lent on mum and dad.
So, Anna, when you're balancing all that up, can you just talk us through, for those who have never been at that level, what time do you get out of bed in the morning to start training, and what time do you finish? And then you watch videos of your competitors, etc. Can you just give us a bit of a view of the so-called training balance versus trying to fund yourself? How hard is it?
Yes, I mean, what I did, it's not like the swimmers getting up at ridiculous hours. We needed to train at hours where we were functional. So, we would do, in a week, we would do 3 gym sessions at 3 hours a piece, 4 track sessions at 4 hours a piece. We'd be on the road between 20 and 50K as well, in between those sessions, as well as an ergo session. Then on top of all of that, you throw in all your stretching, your ice baths, your recovery, your massage, your physio, your medical checks. And then on top of all of that, you add in all of your analysis, your planning, your strategizing, your touching base with all the staff to make sure that your nutrition's on track, your sleep's on track, all those sorts of things. And so you do have to be on top of things. But in most athletes in Australia, you have to love what you do because you don't do it for financial reward. I was very fortunate that I picked up my first sponsor in 2008 and really was actually my bank paid me my yearly wage as a temp, so I didn't have to work. My manager was also my first sponsor. She gave me some money so I didn't have to work. And ultimately I was able to earn some good money by the end of my career and put a deposit down on a house, which I'm very, very proud of.
You do hours and hours of training for 4 years at a time. You can't even add up probably how many hours you put in. And yet the event is over in, 30 seconds. How does the mind deal with that?
Yeah, it's a good question, especially when you consider the athletics runners that, it's over in under 10 seconds. There's no greater pressure than having one chance every 4 years to get it right, which is why preparation is so key. Trust in yourself and your team is so key, but also the enjoyment of the chance to perfect that small notion of time when you get the shot to is very exciting. The trickier part about it is one chance in 4 years for the ability to showcase that. Because it's so rare, it's quite addictive. And I think that's why I ultimately stuck around for as long as I did. But I can guarantee you 30 seconds might not sound like much, but it hurts like hell.
And earlier we talked a little bit about rivalry. In particular, one great rival was Victoria Pendleton. Can you talk us through the apology after the incident in 2006 and that she potentially snubbed you?
No, not a snub, because it was me in the wrong, because I almost caused Victoria Pendleton to crash in a Keirin in 2006 in a semi-final, and I was disqualified from the race as a result of that. So I went to her afterwards to offer an apology and try and explain what happened or why I felt it went wrong. But understandably, she was quite upset and chose not to listen or hear me. So that lended obviously to me being quite upset. I'd never offended anyone before.
Yeah, right.
And I didn't really hear from Vicky personally for the next 4 years. So I made the assumption she didn't like me. And that's kind of where the rivalry started. as it would go on, the two of us would start to rise above a lot of the other competitors and ultimately find ourselves head to head quite a bit in our long 10-year career. And by the time we got to London, you had all the elements to make a great concoction of a massive rivalry. I never want to be on the start line again against Victoria Pendleton in London. I never want to feel what I felt at that time. But I'm glad that I did, because I was one half of a rivalry in women's sprinting that put a spotlight on a sport that never had a spotlight on it before. And I'm really proud of that.
So what did you feel at the time then?
A lot of pressure, a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, a lot of nerves, a lot of expectation, a lot of just, I want to know the end result so I don't feel this suspense. Sometimes it was really hard to breathe. Sometimes it was hard to keep my focus. Sometimes it was turmoil, internal turmoil.
And what did it feel like when you finished?
Utter relief. Huge relief. Yeah, huge relief.
But you won.
I did win. We, the nice thing was, out of London, both of us came away with a gold medal. She won the gold in the keirin.
Yep.
And I won the gold in the sprint. I thought it was pretty profound that she held my hand the whole way down the back straight after losing her final race in front of a home crowd. And it was a great, I think, show of sportswomanship. And I was very thankful for that.
And was that down to some very good tactics between you and your coach and your team?
Yeah, no, that was, I'd say, execution-wise for me,
yep.
and tactics and planning and strategic preparation by the team. That's for sure. And a lot of work and a lot of people went into making that happen, in a race that can be 10 to 30 seconds long.
Yeah.
Took us 4 years to work out how we were going to have the best chance to be competitive against the best in the world, which was Victoria Pendleton.
Yep.
And it boiled down to analysing a lot of her performances, breaking her down to statistical data, and then taking that data and being able to comprehend the information to myself, in that I needed to upskill myself in order to be competitive against what skills, strengths and weaknesses Victoria presented. So it wasn't about Victoria Pendleton, it was about how I could get better to be competitive with the best. And if I was going to win in London and take my silver from Beijing and shift that to gold, I had to overcome the best in the world, and that was her. And so I was thankful for an incredible team that made me look good.
How come she didn't find out what you're up to?
We trialled a strategy a year and a half out from London.
Yep.
And that was using the track stand when I was in front of her to force her from the back position, which was her most practiced and most successful, into the front.
Yep.
And we were successful there. And then we chose not to use that strategy or that skill again until we met her in the final in London.
Oh, so you let her go dormant for a while?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we showed plan B, C, D, E, F, in case we couldn't pull off plan A, which we were preparing behind closed doors with team every day. So, yeah.
Terrific effort. It must feel great, not only just to win, but also that the plan got you there as well.
It really is something to plan in such detail and have it happen in that manner. And so when I came off the track, first person I went to was my coach, Gary, and all I could say to him was thank you. I certainly couldn't do that on my own. And I appreciate that I'm an individual athlete. I'm very much seen that way. But, it certainly wasn't an individual effort, that's for sure.
You had some challenging times during this period as well. You've had personal life and also your coach.
Yeah, so that was between London and Rio. Life happens.
Yep.
And can throw lots of volatile things your way, and it certainly did for me. And personally, obviously going through a marriage breakdown and divorce and a physical injury, which saw the lower few levels of my spine damaged. And then my coach, Gary West, was diagnosed with motor neurone disease. And a year after we won the bronze, my final medal of my Olympic career in Rio, he would lose his battle with motor neurone disease, and then throw on top of that a transition away from the sporting career. And then there's a lot of loss and grief to deal with as a result of that. And, the personal challenges can certainly affect professional performance at the end of the day. And again, my team were just so supportive in making sure that I was as stable as possible, as happy as possible given the circumstances. And and supported, so that we could try and make something of it. And that bronze medal at the time, I was just so thrilled to be able to walk away with something. I was so proud, and it wasn't until I won that medal that it was made clear to me that no Australian athlete from any sport has ever medalled individually at 4 consecutive games. And I was convinced there would be a swimmer in there that had done it, but apparently no one else had. So I was pretty proud of that.
Were you ready to retire then?
Oh, yes.
You were? You're done?
Yes, well and truly.
What happens the day after you retire?
I sleep in, I ate a lot of junk food, and I didn't really move much from my bed. Had to do the usual media reports and stuff like that. But it's a crazy feeling. I didn't even warm down after my last race. I didn't have a protein shake, didn't have a massage, didn't pack up my bike, I just left, went back to the village, had a shower and slept. I was so tired. I was utterly exhausted and looking forward to just catching my breath. It had been an extremely long campaign, and Rio, the finish line for me couldn't come quick enough in Rio.
And how does the athletes adjust to normal life thereafter? Is it tough?
Yeah, it's tough, that's for sure. It's I can't speak for anyone else, but my experience was certainly challenging. And in the beginning, it was really quite fun. It was amazing to have so much freedom and let go of the structure and routine that I was used to for such a long time, and sleep into whatever time I wanted to, and eat whatever I wanted to, and drink whatever I wanted to, and travel wherever I wanted to without reporting to drug testing agencies. And I could sleep over friends' houses at night time. I could go and spend time with my family and friends. I could just do things just cause. And that was really great until that got repetitive. And then I started to miss the routine and the structure, and then started to feel a bit of confusion around, well, if I miss it, did I make the right decision about leaving?
Yep.
But then it just, takes some time to comprehend what I was feeling, processing the loss and grief of all those changes, understanding that even though I loved competition, I was done with the training. I didn't miss training. I missed going to training. I missed my teammates. I missed that environment of, like-minded, motivated people. But I certainly didn't miss the dedication and exhaustion that came with it. So, it was really, taking some time to recalibrate what normal was, because normal was high performance elite athlete lifestyle for 22 years.
Mm-hmm.
And life is very different.
So what happens in the sense of, where does one's career go then? Not everybody walks in your shoes and then has opportunities they may have, but there's also people out there who can take advantage of people like yourself. So how do you make your play after all this?
Well, sometimes it's not about the career, where the career goes. It's what the person wants and what the person needs. And that was something that I had to navigate, was what I felt people expected me to do, what I should do, what I was good at, as opposed to what I wanted to do, what would make me happy, what would give me energy. And I found that balance very difficult and very tricky. I found taking on new things scary, because I thought people expected me to be good, or as good as I was in my career, with something new. So often I didn't try new things initially until my partner Nick just said, forget the whole Meares thing, forget everyone else, what will feed your soul? And the first thing was going back to art school and painting and drawing and finding a love of creativity again, and connecting with a very different circle of people and having a different conversation on a regular basis was very enlightening. Family was very important to me, but obviously at that time it wasn't on the cards. And so I looked into adoption, which as an Australian, and then as a single Australian, non-existent. And then I was steered down the foster care path, and I spent some time becoming a foster carer for emergency cases of children between the age of 4 and 8. Spent some time making myself available to that in between, when I was doing motivational speaking, processing a lot of things about my career, being involved with commentary team for the Tour Down Under, and still being involved with charities, which I found passionate about, and supporting my coach, Gary West, up until his passing in August of 2017. And from there, obviously my partner Nick and I, we had a family of our own. My daughter Evelyn was born last year, and we're expecting our second bubby later this year. And my love of art and creativity has lended me to start a small business called OAM Pottery and Art.
Yep.
And that is really what fills my time. I've also taken on a position to be the general manager, or one of the general managers, under Chef de Mission Petria Thomas for the Commonwealth Games Association of Australia in Birmingham next year.
Mm-hmm.
And looking forward to doing some commentary on the team for the Tokyo Games as well. So there's lots of opportunities and things that are interesting, but I try to keep it as balanced between what I consider as work and what I consider as something that feeds my soul these days.
How's business then? You're conquering that?
It's amazing how much support is out there. I made my daughter a sensory board, and I just put it together with some paint and some bits and bobs I got from the local hardware store, and then decided I'd share that on my social pages for my art and pottery business. And a whole lot of mums got in touch wanting a few of those. So I have actually made quite a few toddler sensory boards, which has been quite fun. I'm loving the pottery side of things, even though I'm a beginner, and made a few sales in the painting sector as well. So it's going along just at a nice pace to start with.
And you've also put pen to paper?
Yeah, I collaborated with Reese Humphrey, who was the head of sport at the Advertiser in Adelaide, and obviously a well-respected sports journalist and a good friend of mine, in order to put together a book called Now. Sometimes the end of the race is just the beginning. And I wanted to be able to offer something that really kind of bore out of the lessons I was able to gain from the motivational speaking that I had done since I retired. And I knew that there was a lot that I had to process once I had left the sport, and I just needed a little bit of time and space to be able to get my head around that, to articulate it to people to understand, or at least find a way that they could take those experiences and apply them for whatever challenges they were facing in their own life. So this book is not your typical sports autobiography book. It doesn't start from where I was born and go through how I grew up and all the different competitions. It fills the gaps in between big competitions that many people weren't tuned into. It really humanizes, I think, my career and my experiences and my challenges. And a lot of people think it's all about the competition, but for me, it was what happened when all the bells and whistles of the green and gold stopped. And that was probably where some of my biggest challenges started. And thanks to my connections and friend in Steve Waugh, he put me in touch with Jeff Armstrong at StokeHillPress.com, who was prepared to publish the book. And all the feedback has been extremely positive.
What would you say to the athletes now, giving them advice in preparation for Tokyo? This is going to be an unusual time, isn't it?
I don't know that anyone can offer them advice, because no one's experienced this before. Athletes are a real life version of reality TV. We witness them putting everything on the line, winning and losing. We see their pain and anguish when they are defeated. We see their joy and elation when they succeed. And, the Olympics will be in some ways sad this year, because it's not going to be run in the same manner of which the world is accustomed to seeing it. Obviously, the Olympics are about bringing people together, which is certainly something that COVID doesn't allow us to do. So, but the simple fact that they're persevering, they're still striving for their goals, and they're trying to make headway in a world that is so chaotic and stressful and uncertain, I think is really aspirational and inspirational for a lot of us to watch. And I hope that that's respected, in particular for people who aren't really interested in the sporting arena. People involved in sport, I think, have an appreciation for it, but I hope that people outside of it can have an appreciation for the dedication and commitment and hard work that's gone into it. I tried to find a way to correlate so people could understand the challenge of delaying the Olympics for 12 months to an athlete. And in some ways it would be like you've spent 4 years studying for a degree and you're about to get your graduation papers, and then something happens and you don't get them. You're going to have to stay committed and study and pay for that study for another 12 months in the hope that you can get it in the next year. So you still have to stay competitive. You still have to keep your grades up, all that sort of thing. You can imagine the distress, the confusion, the frustration of the people involved. And I think the younger athletes will benefit from the delay. I think the older athletes may struggle. I certainly know had this have happened in London, I would have been able to continue. But had this have happened in Rio, you wouldn't have got an extra 12 months out of me.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's a very challenging time, and I just wish them all the best.
When you walk into these corporate events and give these motivation speeches, what do you actually talk about?
Well, you'd have to come to one.
I do.
It's the topics that seem to be repeating for me, which I've learned that sport is an amazing vehicle to teach or at least share experience in, and it crosses every profession that I've come across. Dealing with change, dealing with adversity, resilience. What is resilience? How do you stay motivated? How does an individual function within a team? How do you keep your mindset open to the big picture but focus on the small pieces to make it happen? There are so many parallels that correlate between sport and professional business, or even just life in general. I have so many parents come up to me afterwards and say, I wish my daughter was here to hear that. I wish my son was here to hear that. And I have done a lot of school talks as well for that reason. But I don't pretend to know the profession that I'm speaking to. I just share mine and my experience in a way that I think people can take something away from it. And that gives me great joy.
You get many unusual questions thrown at you?
The most unusual one was, and it stands out because it was never been asked it ever before nor since, was someone asked me for my parents' barbecue chicken stuffing recipe from when we had the chook shop. And I was like, of that 1 hour presentation, you want the chicken stuffing recipe. But they did. So that's cool.
Why do you think sport is so important to the Australian culture and the DNA?
I think we, right from the get-go, are fighters and battlers. And I think we see ourselves in our sportsmen and women on the field. I think that we invest our emotion into those people for their representation of us. And I think our history of sport and competition is so interwoven into our fabric and our culture that it's become a part of our identity. It's become a part of our character. It sets the benchmark for the spirit of our country that people expect. And I think because of all of those elements, we're very much loved on an international level, which is why I think we are held in such high esteem as sportsmen and women and regarded as role models, which is why as sportsmen and women, it's really important to, you just can't pick and choose what you like and dislike about the position. You have to take everything that comes with it, and being a role model is one of them.
Can you think back when you had that speech that night or that day, that 3-minute speech, and you said you had to inspire the best of the best? What words do you use to inspire the best of the best?
Well, my first words were to the Olympic team with the Governor General and the Chef de Mission, Kitty Chiller, and Channel 7, and 400 plus of Australia's best athletes. My first words were simply, oh shit, I've lost my speech. And that certainly broke the ice. I can guarantee you of that. I didn't write it. Normally I'm a written girl. And I had to use the sponsored phone of the team. And it's not my usual piece of technology. And I'm pretty sure many people will relate to a new piece of technology and then touching a screen, and then something goes one way and something goes another, and you just don't know how to get it back. And that's what happened to me as I walked onto the stage to present my 3-minute speech. It took me a little bit to get it back, and I was just about to call my teammate Jacob Schmidt to come up and help me, but I nutted it out. And I think it set a nice tone, to be honest, because sometimes you just don't have to be so formal.
Must have felt terrific giving that inspiration to all those youngsters coming through that front door.
It didn't feel terrific delivering it, but it felt terrific to see the response. Even my own teammates came up to me and said, where did that come from? But, other athletes that I respect and admire immensely, like Sam Stosur, just came up to me afterwards to tell me how inspirational it was and what she got out of it. And it was nice to be able to hit a chord with people who are the most motivated and driven that I've come across.
When you are captain, and you've done the speeches you say, but you're putting yourself available for these top athletes. Did they come and talk to you during the course of the Olympic Games? Do they actually get your counsel?
Yeah, some do, some don't. Obviously, some are a bit standoffish and unsure whether they can approach, but most of them, I think felt fairly comfortable. And once people get to know me, they're pretty chilled. But up until that point, like anything, you meet someone new that you've kind of looked up to or seen on TV. Like I remember I ran into our local news presenter. I'm like, oh, hello. And then I realized, that they had no idea who I was. So it's important for athletes or anyone to really rely on the team and the people around them that they're familiar with. But sometimes it's nice to hit relatable accord with someone else from a different perspective.
And if you were to look back at that young 11-year-old starting out on her cycling career, what advice would you give her now?
Nothing. I've been down this road a lot with my psyche, and the hardest part that I've found in my career of late is being able to acknowledge my own contribution to my success. And it wasn't until she asked me to trip back to visit my 11-year-old self in my head and just think what she must think looking at me with all the things that I have done and achieved. And she simply asked me, what would you say to that 11-year-old girl? And all I could say in my head and in my heart was thank you, because she was about to go through everything that I had been through to become the person that I am today. And I'm grateful for that little girl.
And it's been a real privilege to have this conversation with you today. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to No Limitations.